This is, like I said, the most important slide because this shows where I live. And I think this is the most important because from someone that's in North Carolina and the difference between there and northern Indiana, the concept may be the same, but some of the prescriptions are going to be tweaked a little bit. So of what I'm going to present, it's from data that surrounds that red dot. Remember that as we're going through things, whether it be seeding dates, seeding rates. Those may change the farther north you go, the farther south you go. We do get lake effect snow. That helps us over winter sometimes that others don't. So again, kind of reference back to this and remember where we live. If you want to look it up on a map, look for Warsaw. You will not find Pierceton, Indiana, a pretty small town. This is the second most important slide. I like to tell everyone that it is not just myself that farms. It is a family farm. These are my parents, Jim and Kathy. As my dad always says, someone has to stay home and work when I'm out traveling and talking to all of you. So when it is spring and fall time, these are the workers. We have 2,000 acres, 100% no-till, 100% cover crop, and we're down to about 100 and some acres that is not pattern drained. So I think that's pretty important as when it comes springtime to kill cover crops off and get in there with the sprayer. We've got rid of a lot of the excess water. That's things that help us out. So just remember those as we go through here. As far as seeding cover crops, I'm not going to disagree with anyone that would say that a drill is the best way to seed a cover crop. This field was seeded with the drill. It's the way we did quite a few bean acres for the first few years. But when we started attacking our 2,000 acres, there was no way we were going to drill all 2,000 acres in the fall and get a successful cover crop. So we looked at other options. But there's times where using a grain drill is very successful. You get even stands. You can use all seeds. Basically, anything can go through that drill, or when we start talking about aerial application, when you throw Austrian winter peas or faba beans or something out of an airplane, not going to work too well. So the best way to do that is with the drill. A negative to that, and why we've went away from very many acres of this, is that to drill all 2,000 acres in the fall, you just can't get done. We talked today about seeding 20 million acres of cover crops. Some may get done with the drill, just not a lot of them because of the time. The other negative that I see on our farm is the cost of it. I threw $16 an acre up there. I talked to a guy 2 weeks ago, and he said, I only figure $7 an acre. Well, I think if you put the fuel, the man hour, the wear and tear, and everything to it, this is a realistic cost. I laid under our grain drill last winter and put all new bearings, all new blades, all new springs, all new boots, everything on it that you can think of, and I think this cost is pretty cheap. I don't really want to run my tool that I'm seeding cash crop with across the field and put more wear and tear acres on it and stuff with cover crop. So that's why I throw this out there, is because in our opinion, this was a deciding factor to not drill as many acres as some of the other options. Now, we do use a cocktail mix of cover crops. This is a 13-way mix after wheat, and the best way to seed that is with a grain drill. I'm going to talk a lot about aerial application, and we're not going to bring an airplane in after wheat to seed those acres. We're not going to do other methods. That at that point in time, like I said, I think the grain drill is a great option and the best way to get that mix in the ground. Sunflowers, different things that wouldn't be good on top of the ground, get them in and they're going to survive better. Now, like I told the first group, it wouldn't do you any good if I just stood up here and showed you pretty pictures and told you that everything was perfect, because when we get out to the farm, that's not the way it happens. We seem to always have a problem. And You know, I've always heard that if it's a dry fall, you better be drilling your cover crops in. You want to get them in where there's moisture to where they can grow. You definitely don't want to fly them on or put them on with a high boy sprayer. It's not going to work. I'm here to tell you that if it never rains again, no method works. So Mother Nature still has to cooperate with us a little bit. Here's a year where we just didn't get enough rain to germinate cover crops. This was a grain drill. You can see the marks in the soil where it went through. All we did was bust the trash loose, and then the first wind or rain, it just removed all of it. We were worse here than not seeding a cover crop. So to say that the drill is best every time is not the case either. There's going to be years where we're glad we didn't run a drill through the field. So like I said, I'm trying to point out pluses and minuses of things that we've seen over time with cover crops. The main way that we're seeding cover crops on our farm and actually have seeded for others around the area is the airplane. This last fall we seeded almost 50,000 acres with airplanes, so we can cover a lot of ground fast and get a pretty good job with that. I put this picture in here because you can see basically the height that pilot is flying is treetop high. Off of the crop a little bit more than they are with fungicide or insecticide. The higher they are willing to fly, the wider their pattern can be of that plane. So just a reference of that. The pluses and minuses to this system. I think one of the biggest pluses is the cost. When you're doing 50,000 acres like we are, you can bring that cost down. I didn't put a dollar figure here because if you have 50 acres that you're wanting to seed, it's going to be a higher cost than the 50,000 acre group that we have. If you're 2 miles from the airport, it's probably going to be cheaper than if you're 30 miles from the airport because this operation, all of the cost is on fuel. But when you get a big group put together, I think that the cost is a benefit to this system. Acres covered, we're getting about 1,000 to 1,500 acres per plane per day on average, so we can get a lot of acres covered when the weather's right. As far as timing, we don't have to wait for harvest, just like the high boy sprayer. We can go in there and seed cover crops when we want to, not wait till the corn dries down or we get beans run and get a successful stand. So I think the timing is a positive of an airplane. If it rains a lot, we had 2008, Hurricane Ike came through our area and dumped 4 to 8 inches of rain in about 3 to 4 days. On the 5th day, we went to the airport and started flying on cover crops. With a high boy sprayer, you're not going to go to the field because you're going to have to let it dry out or you're going to be stuck out there in some spots. So a positive to the airplane is if it's a rainy period, you're fine. On the other hand, if it's windy, when you're using annual ryegrass and at 5 to 7 mile per hour winds, you have to shut down. There's times that we've sat for a whole week waiting for the wind and hoping that the wind dies down so that we can fly on cover crops. Where with a high boy sprayer and you're down in the crop canopy, the wind's not a big deal. So again, just some pluses and minuses to the different systems. The only negative to the airplane that I see is that every corner covered. And what I'm saying there is that at 140 mile per hour, when Mike talked about trying to turn the high boy sprayer on and off at the right time, at 140 mile per hour, it's tough for the airplane pilot to get that on and off the first year or two. It's going to take a learning curve. He's either going to miss a spot in your field or he's going to get some on the neighboring field. So that's the only drawback that I see to the airplane. The longer the pilot does it, if you have a good pilot that's willing to go out and look at fields, look at their patterns and stuff, that's going to improve. Also, with the more acres you get, we've got 1,000-acre blocks that are not all the same farmer, but they're all using cover crops to where getting it on the neighbor does not matter as much. So when you get 1,000 acres, you've got a lot less neighbors. This becomes less of an issue with the more cover crops we get. Whether it be with a high boy sprayer, an airplane, some other methods, this is our goal, to get that cover crop out there, get it growing, and get it started before we harvest our cash crop. We're already sequestering nutrients, recycling them. We're taking out compaction. We've got a nice footing there to work off of if it does turn off to be a wet fall. So this is what we want. And basically those methods are an airplane or a high boy sprayer at this time to get that done. Now, this is a slide that everyone says I'm a big fan of aerial application. I'm a big fan of aerial application because I'm a big fan of the timing. And what I did was I think 2 years ago in December, we had a 2 or 3 inch rain, and we had some fields that had drilled cover crop that if you were to drive by at 55 miles per hour, they looked beautiful, but they washed. Where the stuff that we had flown on looked like there's some bare spots, not as even, people weren't as happy with it, but nothing moved in that 2 to 3 inch rain. So we went out and started digging around to see what the difference was when, if you drove by, you'd have liked the drilled field. This is what we saw under the ground when we dug root pits. Again, the left side was drilled and the right side was flown on. And you start saying, well, how is that possible? How did it have 2 to 3 times the amount of root growth of what was flown on? Well, if we look at the seeding dates, of which an average fly-on date in our area is September the 7th, and then I just picked 1 month later. I looked at the sunlight and the temperatures, and in that month's time, while we're waiting to get crops harvested, whether it be corn or beans, we lost an hour and a half of sunlight and 12 degrees of temperature. That's very critical in starting those cover crops. It's very critical in being able to select more species to use as a cover crop. Because some things want sunlight and some things want heat to get them to get a start so we can overwinter them. So whether it be a high boy sprayer or an airplane, I'm a fan of the timing. I think we need to get the cover crops on sooner rather than later so that we get more advantages out of them. More organic matter, more root growth, sequestering more nutrients and all that from the timing. And again, the way that we've selected right now on our farm and a lot of them around us is this airplane is the way that we're getting a bulk of the acres covered. One of the benefits to it is when we go to an airport to work, we can bring in a lot of airplanes. This photo was taken just before lunchtime. You can't really see it, but the pilots are running to tie the planes down. There's a big storm coming, so we had to shut down. But at this time, right before lunch, we've already seeded 4,000 acres of cover crops for the day. So a lot of acres really fast. If we could have kept going this day, we'd have had 7,500, 8,000 acres of cover crops in when we're organized in good weather. So threw some pictures in here of how our operation started. I get in areas and they say, well, we can't get an airplane pilot to get equipment. We just can't do it. Well, I work in areas that started out as one farmer calling and saying, I have 50 acres to seed that I'd like you to do with an airplane. By the end of the week or 2 weeks, it turns into 500 or 1,000 acres. Just take a piece of paper and write names down and numbers, and before you know it, you've got enough to get a pilot there. What we did at this airport was rented a telehandler. That telehandler was $300 a day. When you take that over 1,000 acres, it's not a big cost to get started. We took some seed there, had the telehandler there, and flew the airplanes in. This airport started at 1,000 acres. Today we do 10,000 acres out of that airport. So to say that it can't be done, it can be done, and it can be done fairly simple. Now, I had the question last night, and you asked about how much is in each plane. This is a 602 plane, which will hold that full bag. But if you have a 500-gallon hopper, that bag doesn't always fit in. As you can see, the pilot's up there trying to pack it in so that we can get the lid closed. That's why we've updated our system and went to a truck with scales and an auger on it. We've come a long way. Basically, you can see here we're fueling that plane while he stopped. We're pumping him full of seed quicker than actually we could dump that bag in him. And every time he leaves, that's scales that are on those trucks. We can tell exactly how many pounds of seed were in him, and we know how many acres he did. We can calibrate that plane extremely fast. So this system's nice. We've actually, the pilot's updated the truck, and we have a new one for next fall that's a little quicker to and from the next airport. This truck was getting a little age to it and wouldn't go over about 45 miles per hour. So we did get that updated for next year. The other nice thing is with the airplane is we have as flown maps. So of every acre that we flew on, we have this map that tells us who flew it on, what the pilot's name was, what the wind speed was, the time of day, the wind direction, and then if you look over to the right, you can see blue lines. That's actually the path that the airplane took. You can see that he trimmed 2 passes on some ends, 1 on other. You can actually see there's a little gap in the middle, so that come next spring, if the farmer calls me and complains and says there's a problem, we can go to these maps and troubleshoot really fast. It gives the product and everything there so that we can dial it in and figure out what's wrong with facts, not jumping to conclusions. The diffuser, through this picture in here, I know there's some expensive diffusers. There's some out there for smaller seeds. It's a thinner diffuser. This is what we're using. It's a high volume diffuser. Not a lot of money. I've told my pilots when we're getting the results we're getting, why update? This is good enough for us. But know that if your pilots are struggling, there are other things out there that can help them out to dial it in. And again, this is the results we want at harvest time, is that cover crop out there. I'm going to show several pictures here. I guess I've got one more on timing in here. I threw this in here because I know in our area we get comments on you cannot get that cover crop on until the corn is a certain leaf stage. It's got to be dried down. And as you can see, this corn is pure green and the cover crop's already growing. As far as corn is concerned, as soon as I can get an airplane, we'll start flying on corn. I can't get airplanes any sooner because they're still flying on fungicide, insecticide, doing their other work. But timing on corn, pretty much any time, get it out there, get that rain, get it started. But as you can see, there's actually radishes, crimson clover, and ryegrass all growing in here in that cornfield. The timing on that, we do not see where dates really affect it. It's other issues. Now, here's the photos. I think I have 5 or 6 in a row. If you look in the corner up there, it gives the seeding date of September 5th, the year, and 25 pounds of, this was ryegrass flown on. If we go to mixes, we're backing the ryegrass down, and we're still at 25 pounds total of seed product. As I get around the Midwest, normally a couple problems with aerial application not being successful. The first one is they try to drop the rate of seed. Time and time again, it just doesn't work on an average. It might work 1 year, but when you look at a 10-year average, it's not enough. We tested all the way from 10 pounds to 50 pounds of seed and looked at 25 and 30 pounds being the most successful over multiple years. So keep that in mind, but each slide does give our rate and the date there. These photos were normally taken in the springtime. I've normally sprayed this field during the day and then went back and took a picture in the afternoon, while after 4 o'clock, after we've quit spraying for the day. So that was 2006. This is 2007. 2008, and this is the year that I'm going to show you later with the helicopter. Still was pretty successful in corn. A few bare spots, but not too bad. Not the same story in beans. But 2009, 2010, 2011, I can show you pictures all day long of successful stands of cover crops into cornfields. Mike talked about this year not being as successful. We were cooler. We did not have as much sunlight in the fall, and the moisture was one of those things that kept us from being perfect. It looks like when the snow comes off in the springtime, we're going to still be pretty good again in those cornfields. Soybeans, not always the same case. I don't know how many years in a row I tried to get Mr. Towery to work on this issue for me, and we just couldn't get it figured out. But I think we figured it out the last 2 years. If we look at the bean plant and you go out in a bean field and dig at the time we're putting on cover crops, that field is bone dry. The bean plant has just pulled all the moisture out of that field. We ran a tile through a wheat field and then through a bean field one year, and when we hit that bean field, the chain machine just couldn't hardly dig. It was so dry. So when we get years like this that we have enough rain, we have a very successful stand to cover crops in the bean fields. If we swing center pivots, we have a very successful stand to cover crops. It seems to be moisture related on the soybeans. This was taken this fall. As you can see, great stand to cover crops in with the soybeans. We did cut the tips of that off a little bit with a bean head. Not a problem. Annual ryegrass, most of the grasses are so thin at that time of the year, you're knocking them over, not putting them in the bean head. Brassicas can be a different story. That's something that you have to watch out on the timing. Radishes, turnips, some of that stuff can get enough growth that you get a late fall that can cause some problems, and about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you're done running beans. But normally not an issue. As you can see, we've got great footing to work off of. Great cover already started this year in those beans. But like before, I would be doing a disservice if all I showed you was pretty pictures and not told you that this could be possible also. This is a field that we flew on. This was the third year that we had flown it on. And unfortunately, this is the best it looked in 3 years. The first year, the guy had a chemical issue that we weren't aware of when we first started. The second year was a helicopter, which I'll show you in a minute, and this was the third year. The guy had equip that paid for 3 years of cover crops. Come the fourth year, he said, I am done. If this is the best you can do in 3 years, I am out. I don't need cover crops. Luckily, this field went to corn that year when he harvested that fall. Every field that looked like this, or this was the best it was in the 3 years, had 30 to 40 bushel yield increase in corn, even though this was the best it looked. He is now back to using cover crops on every acre on his farm and doesn't care what it looks like on top of the ground. He's went to digging root pits and looking at what's going on there, where we should really be evaluating things. So just know that this is possible in beans. This is still better than nothing. I call this 80%. If you looked back at the root growth on the flown on versus the drilled, 80% of the more root growth is still better than drilled and no roots at time. So just remember that. Timing wise on beans, we've messed with flying on. We've actually started with airplanes on August 1st. We've went every 7 days, every 15 days, just depends on the year and when I can get the pilots to switch back away from their potato acres and seed corn acres to come test for me. This was a year that if you look at it, you could come to the conclusion that basically the later you seed it, the better it was. That's not always the case. I could show you other years where earlier was the better. What happened this year was when we seeded it on August 15th, we got a little shower that germinated some of it. It didn't all make it, and it killed. Where on September the 1st, we had a bigger rain, germinated, and it survived. So again, the success of the program relies on Mother Nature a little bit, that we have to have some moisture. Some of the things are out of our control, so we just have to be aware of that. Other things that can improve that stand, if you look here, is what these streaks are, is some leftover nutrients due to a planter, some kind of a bean row or corn row decaying. And as you can see, the whole field was flown on 25 pounds of cover crops, yet it only grew where it had nutrients in places. So at times, it's that their field aren't in condition yet. Year 1, year 2, it's no different than when we started to no-till. Some things have to change and take place. The longer we get into the system, the better we are at getting a successful stand of cover crops. We've got some things working for us. This is a case where it wasn't the pilot's fault. It wasn't anyone's fault other than this farmer just had some imbalance in his soil. Now, we talked about aerial application, and when I say aerial application, I mean an airplane, not necessarily a helicopter. For the first 3 years that we flew on, we used an airplane pilot that we could not get along with. When he had enough seed left over to fly on his own farm and a customer's out of what was supposed to go on my farm, I was not real happy. We decided to switch. Unfortunately, the farmer in us decided that cheaper is got to be better. So we went to a helicopter. Even though there's 3 to 4 people on each side that are filling this helicopter, he was only on the ground. Wasn't even on the ground 30 seconds. I mean, we had him out of there in no time. He was gone for about 2 minutes and back to reload. It looks like a lot of help, but because of the fuel being less than an airplane, this was a lot cheaper. But unfortunately, we got hung up with the cost, and like I said, cheaper is not always better. We were watching pennies and walking away from dollars here. With the helicopter and anything dry, it is tough to get a good pattern. What happens is the faster he flies, the tighter his pattern gets. And it's to do with the downdraft of that rotor. We've tested since then. We've sent seed. We tried to make it work. And unless they're going to drag a bucket or a tub underneath, which if you have power lines and trees, they're not a big fan of, it's going to be tough to use anything dry out of helicopter. So basically the message here is just be careful. Don't get hung up on cost, and you know, cheaper is not always better. Some other seeding methods, other than a drill, other than a high boy sprayer, or different things that we've talked about. A very cheap method, a little herd seeder. It's a little electric motor. You can run a switch to the cab of about anything, a pickup truck, your four-wheeler. We put 3 or 4 on a sprayer starting out with. You know, just some ideas to get cover crops on your farm. Others, vertical tillage tool. Not a big fan of any tillage at all, but if you're going to do it, why not seed a cover crop at the same time? This is a Salford. This is a Landau set up with, you know, Valmar Gandy type boxes. Very easy delivery system. And while you're going across there, just like this is in southern Michigan, potato ground that has to do tillage, same thing. We convinced them to put a seeder on there. You know, very simple delivery system, similar to the end of the high boy sprayer of Mike's. And here's the results of those fields. Tillage is done if you have to do it, and in springtime you've got a successful cover crop there.